All right, good Monday morning, everybody. I hope that you got your study on, that you're ready to go, that you got your coffee because you're going to need it. I hope that you enjoy this first study because you're going to start seeing the benefits of the fruits of your labor almost immediately. I promise you. Okay, we got to learn some concepts though. There are some English concepts that we have to learn, but don't get don't get intimidated. Okay, some of us have been out of school for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and that's perfectly okay. You'll be perfectly fine, I promise you, because we're going to take this kind of slow and steady to make sure that you understand. And I'm telling you today, if you do what we talk about today, you're going to start already seeing benefits from that, okay? Now, knowing that, you have books out there that try to tell you that the best way to do Bible study is that you've got to do observation, interpretation, and application. And that's just not true. It makes it very difficult because if you start with the observation, then you kind of just muddy the waters and you make it very difficult. You can't tell the forest from the trees. And that's what we want to do. We want to tell the forest from the trees. There's an old saying that used to say, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep the main thing the main thing. Okay, because we'll get all into that clutter later. The observation comes later, but right now we need to just understand some basic text. Now, there's another book out there by another pastor who's also a professor in seminary who who teaches that you got to start with the paragraph level. So they teach a paragraph level first, and I'm here to tell you that I don't think you can do that yet because there's another step. The observation tells you to look at word, 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 word. Here they tell you look at the paragraph, and I'm suggesting you got to start at the sentence level first. Okay, you don't need to just start at the word level. You don't need to start at the paragraph level, but you need to start at the sentence level. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because the very first thing we're going to talk about today is independent clauses. Because you need to understand an independent clause. Let me get this pulled up and pull it back up to where it needs to be. Okay. Now, an independent clause is very simple, okay, because it's just a simple sentence. You're trying to make a sentence that makes sense and be as short as possible. And so an independent clause is just a group of words that has a subject, verb, and an object, or a noun, verb, noun, and it can stand on its own. It makes sense all by itself. So if I say, I love you, you're going to say, oh, I love you too, because you understand what I said. I conveyed a sentence that had meaning and made sense. Okay, and it didn't need anything else behind it. It didn't need anything else added to it. I love you makes sense all by itself. The next example says, I walked home. Well, that makes sense all by itself too, because you don't need to know where they walked home from or what they were doing when they were walking. Just I walked home makes sense all by itself. Now, in the section where it says you try, it says when I got home, I fell asleep. Now, what's your subject, verb, and object? Well, if you're looking for the first subject, verb, and object is I got home. I is your subject, got is your verb, and home is your object. But that's not what the sentence is trying to convey. That's not the main thing it's trying to convey. What it's trying to convey is I fell asleep. Subject, verb, object. The reason why this one isn't is because it's connected to this word when, and we'll talk about that next time, okay? But so this isn't it because this is what's called a dependent clause. We'll talk about that next time. What you're looking for is the independent clause because if I said when I got home, that makes absolutely no sense. Well, when I got home, you'd be like, well, when you got home, what? But if I said I fell asleep, well, that makes perfect sense all by itself. Now, the next one that we've got here where it says you try, this is actually Mark chapter 1 and verse 8. And it says, at that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. So, what is the subject, verb, and object in this one? Well, again, if you go with the first, then time is the first subject, right? That's a noun, time. And then the verb would be what? Came. and then the object from Nazareth. Okay. So, do you think that Mark chapter 1 and verse 8 is trying to convey that time came from Nazareth, that the origin of time originated in Nazareth? Is that what we think that we get from this? No, that's not what it's saying at all. Because even though time is the first noun, it's not the main noun, because at that time is part of another phrase that we'll talk about in a couple videos from now. Okay, so really, Jesus is the first main noun. That's your main subject. Came is the verb, and from Nazareth is the object. So Jesus came from Nazareth. Okay, that's what Mark is trying to convey. And you'd be like, well, why is that important that Jesus came? Wouldn't his baptism be more important? No, because in the beginning, Mark quotes Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3. And he says that a messenger is going to come, a voice in the wilderness, crying in the wilderness, is going to come, and he's going to prepare the way for the Lord. And this is from Isaiah chapter 40. And the word Lord in Isaiah 40 is Yahweh. So this messenger, the voice is crying in the wilderness, is going to prepare the way for Yahweh himself to come. That's significant because in verse 4, the Bible says, in the NIV it says, and so John came, because he's the fulfillment of that voice crying in the wilderness. And then in verse 8 right here, the Bible says that Jesus came. Jesus came because he's the fulfillment of the promise of Yahweh to come, God with us, Emmanuel. Jesus is Yahweh, and that is the theologically significant point that Mark is trying to say. Even though Jesus came as a servant, didn't have this big grand welcoming like a royal person does. He came, he was born in a barn, and literally, but he is Yahweh. That's the significant thing about Jesus that Mark wants to convey, which tells us that the Son of God is just much more than a son. So just kind of keep that in mind. Just understanding just an independent clause makes all the difference in the world. Small little independent clause, 2 words, Jesus came. And boy, some theological significance there, right? Number 2, there's also sometimes no subject. Okay, so you got your subject, verb, and object, but sometimes there is no subject, like don't be late or get on the ground now. Well, there is no subject because don't is do not, and that is your verb. Late is the object. And get on the ground, get is the verb, and on the ground is your object, but the subject is missing, but there's an implied subject because the implied word is you. This is a command. Okay, so what they're trying to say is you don't be late. You get on the ground now. So there's an implied subject that's there because that's what commands do. Commands, imperatives, whatever you want to call them, they imply the verb with it. So sometimes there's no subject, but sometimes there's no object. Notice that Jesus says, the smallest verse in the Bible says Jesus wept. Jesus wept, and it doesn't tell us where he wept, or, well, I mean, it does. But it doesn't tell us in that verse. It doesn't tell us in this sentence. Because why? Because it makes sense all by itself. There isn't any need for anything else. This is what the writer wanted to convey. Jesus wept. Okay? The professor taught. Now, we don't need to know what he was teaching, what was his favorite subject or whatever. We just know that in a moment, he had taught something. Okay? And both of those sentences make perfect sense, even though there is nothing to follow up with as far as an object goes. So your independent clauses, okay, have a subject, verb, and an object, and they can stand on their own. Sometimes they have no subject, or sometimes they have no object, okay? And the one thing that all 3 of them have in common is that they're independent, kind of like us. We love our freedom here in America. We love to be independent. We love to be on our own and stand on our own 2 feet without the help of other people. Okay, that's kind of the way independent clauses are. They stand on their own without help from any other words, phrases, or clauses. They make sense all by themselves. Now, I gave you a couple exercises, and I don't want to spend long here, but notice that in the directions I point out, you circle the subject, underline the verb, and then box in the object. And I gave you two examples right here. The first example just shows a subject and a verb. The object is on the floor, but it's not necessary at this point. Okay, we'll talk about that in a couple videos from now. The book of Mark is a story about the Son of God. You got the subject. Mark is a story. That is enough in and of itself. I did circle the whole thing, the book of Mark, because I also want you to understand that there's this thing called subject and predicate, and we'll talk about that in a couple of videos also. But Mark is the simple subject. The complete subject is the book of Mark, because we can understand that Mark is a story all by itself without everything else. And so that's what I'm wanting you to do, is just find the independent clause. And what we're going to do is, if you see what I laid out below, is the book of Philemon. Now, I didn't go through and do every verse, but I did most of them because a couple of them are a little more complex. So we'll revisit the book of Philemon. But in here, I laid out, if you look through it, you can see that verses 4, verses 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, I went through with each one of them, and in each one of them, there's an independent sentence in there that's going to be laid out like the three types that we've talked about, whether it's going to have a subject, verb, object, a subject, verb, or a verb, object. Okay, those are going to be laid out in here. There may even be one, or there might even be more than one in one or two of these sentences. Okay, so go over these and circle your subject, underline the verb, and box in the object. Okay, and do that with all of these. And then what I want you to do after this, because you want to make this fun, is I want you to read aloud only the independent clauses. Okay, go straight down the list and just start reading out loud. Listen to yourself as you're reading it. Don't read anything else but those independent clauses. And tell me if you're not starting to learn something about the book of Philemon that you never even knew before, just by the independent clauses. Independent clauses are so fundamentally important. You need them. They're very important to our understanding of what the Bible is trying to say. And as a matter of fact, with anything that we write, it doesn't matter if you pick up a sports page, it doesn't matter if you read the front page of a newspaper, if you're reading a novel, or whatever it is that you like to read, poems and such, there are independent clauses, and those independent clauses drive whatever it is that they're trying to talk about. It's the main thing. Talk about keeping the main thing. The main thing, it starts right here. You've got to understand the independent clause. Subject, verb, object, most of the time. Most of the time. Y'all guys have a great day. God bless you. Bring these papers back Thursday. There's going to be an answer sheet on Thursday that you can download, and hopefully yours will match up with mine. And we'll see. And if not, well, we got time to work on it. It's okay. Have fun with this. Enjoy it. Okay. God bless y'all. Have a great day, and we'll see you Thursday or Friday. Take care.